"Who do you think you are, calling me out like that?" Officer Jake Hendricks sneered, standing a few feet away from the black SUV. The traffic stop had taken an ugly turn, and the officer's hand hovered near his taser. "You goats think you can run around here like you own the place." He let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. The man standing before him was calm but stern, dressed sharply in a navy suit, his tie perfectly aligned. His expression was unreadable, but his piercing gaze made Jake shift uncomfortably. "You called me a what?" the man asked, his voice low and firm, cutting through the tension like a blade. "A goat." Jake barked again, his face red. "I've seen your type, always causing trouble, thinking you're above the law." The silence that followed was chilling. A small crowd of bystanders had gathered, smartphones out, capturing every second of the confrontation. Finally, the man reached into his coat pocket slowly, deliberately. Jake stiffened, his hand flying to his holstered weapon. "Don't you dare," he warned. Unfazed, the man calmly pulled out a black leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gold badge and ID. He stepped closer, his words measured. "I'm Aaron Knight, Deputy Director of the FBI." Jake's jaw dropped, his face draining of color. The weight of his mistake hit him like a freight train, and his hand trembled as he let go of his weapon. The crowd gasped audibly, and someone whispered, "Oh my God, he's FBI." Aaron didn't move, his gaze locked on Jake. The officer stumbled over his words, trying to salvage the situation. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was just—" "Save it," Aaron interrupted. "You just made a career-ending mistake. Now, let's see how far this rabbit hole goes." The sound of approaching sirens added to the tension. Jake's backup was arriving, but so was Aaron's team. Aaron's day had started like any other. He was on his way to meet with a team of federal agents in Chicago for a high-profile briefing. Despite his rank, he preferred driving himself, finding it therapeutic. The roads were quiet, and the drive through the suburbs was uneventful until he spotted the flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. He sighed, pulling over and rolling down his window. A young, overzealous officer approached, his hand resting on his belt. Aaron watched the man size him up, noting the arrogance in his demeanor. "License and registration," the officer barked, peering into the SUV. Aaron handed over his ID, calm and cooperative. The officer frowned as he examined the documents, but made no acknowledgement of Aaron's credentials. Instead, he handed them back roughly and stepped away, muttering under his breath. Aaron noticed the officer checking his plates and making a call. A few minutes later, Jake returned, visibly agitated. "You mind stepping out of the vehicle?" Jake demanded. "What's the issue, officer?" Aaron asked, still seated. "Step out," Jake repeated, his voice rising. Aaron exited the SUV, towering over Jake, who seemed taken aback by the man's commanding presence. "That's quite a suit," Jake sneered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Let me guess, some big-shot lawyer, huh? Bet you think you're untouchable." Aaron said nothing, watching as Jake's hostility grew. The officer began hurling thinly veiled insults, clearly attempting to provoke him. As the exchange escalated, Aaron's patience wore thin. "Are you done?" he asked, his voice steady. Jake laughed bitterly. "Done? I've barely started. You're just another goat, thinking you can graze wherever you want without consequences." Aaron's eyes narrowed. "Do you even understand what you're saying?" The situation might have gone unnoticed had it not been for the bystanders gathering nearby. Several had their phones out, recording the incident. Jake seemed oblivious to the cameras, his ego blinding him to the consequences of his actions. When Aaron revealed his identity as Deputy Director of the FBI, the onlookers erupted in shocked murmurs. Jake's arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by a mix of panic and confusion. But Aaron wasn't finished. He wasn't just going to walk away from this. The moment had taken on a life of its own, and the officer's actions had opened the door to something much larger. Suddenly, the sound of distant sirens grew louder. Jake's backup was arriving, but so were federal agents alerted by Aaron's presence. Aaron's gaze didn't waver as he addressed Jake one last time. "I suggest you get ready. Things are about to get interesting." The first squad car pulled up, followed by another. A burly officer stepped out, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking from Jake to Aaron. Aaron raised his badge and spoke with authority. "I'll explain once we've secured the area. But first, I suggest you have a word with your officer here. The burly officer's eyes widened as he recognized Aaron's name. He turned to Jake, his expression unreadable. Hendricks, what the hell did you do? Jake stammered, trying to explain, but the damage was done. Aaron remained composed, but his mind was racing. He knew this was about more than just one officer's behavior. This was systemic, and he intended to expose it. As the crowd watched, the tension reached its breaking point. And then, the air grew heavy as the second officer, Sergeant Barnes, faced Jake. His voice was low but forceful. Hendricks, start talking. Now. Jake fumbled, his usual bravado replaced by unease. I pulled him over for speeding, he mumbled, avoiding Aaron's sharp gaze. Aaron spoke up, his voice measured but firm. Speeding? That's your story? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like this was something else entirely. Sergeant Barnes held up a hand, signaling for silence. Deputy Director Knight, I apologize on behalf of this department. We'll handle this internally. Aaron folded his arms, unimpressed. You think I drove halfway across the state to let you sweep this under the rug? No. We're doing this the right way. Jake's face paled further, and the crowd murmured as Aaron gestured toward one of the bystanders. Did you get all of this on video? A young man in a hoodie stepped forward, holding his phone. Every word, he said. I already uploaded it to the cloud, just in case. Jake shot the man a glare, but it was clear the situation was spiraling out of his control. Before he could respond, another vehicle arrived, this one unmarked, with dark-tinted windows. Aaron's backup. 2 agents stepped out, their suits crisp, their expressions unreadable. They moved toward Aaron without hesitation. Deputy Director, one of them said, nodding respectfully. Secure the scene, Aaron instructed. I want every detail documented. The agents got to work, speaking with bystanders and collecting video evidence. Jake looked around desperately, but no one came to his defense, not even Sergeant Barnes, who was now speaking quietly into his radio. Aaron turned back to Jake, his voice cutting through the commotion. You've got 2 choices. Cooperate fully, or keep digging your own grave. What's it going to be? Jake's hands trembled, but he managed a weak nod. I'll cooperate, he muttered. Aaron stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Good. Because this isn't just about you. It's about every officer who thinks they can act like this without consequences. And trust me, the FBI takes this very seriously. As Jake was led toward a squad car, the crowd erupted in cheers. It was a small victory, but Aaron knew it was just the beginning. Earlier that morning, Aaron had been in a meeting with his team, discussing strategies for tackling corruption within law enforcement. It was a topic that hit close to home for him, not because he had faced it personally, but because he had seen how it devastated communities. I want this operation airtight, Aaron had said, his tone leaving no room for debate. We're not just going after individuals. We're dismantling entire networks. The team had nodded in agreement, and Aaron had felt a sense of purpose as he left the room. But now, standing in the middle of a suburban street, he realized just how much work there was to do. As the agents continued their investigation, Aaron noticed a woman in the crowd, her face tense with worry. She approached cautiously, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Excuse me, she said softly. I just wanted to thank you. My son had a run-in with that officer last year, and no one believed him. Aaron's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that. What happened? She hesitated, glancing around nervously. He accused my son of stealing, even though we had proof he was at work when it happened. They let him go, but not before making him sit in a holding cell for hours. Aaron nodded, his jaw tightening. Thank you for telling me. If you're willing, I'd like to include your story in our investigation. The woman hesitated, but then nodded. Anything to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. Aaron took her contact information and assured her that his team would follow up. As she walked away, he felt a renewed determination. The tension seemed to ease slightly as the agents finished their initial assessment. Sergeant Barnes approached Aaron cautiously. Deputy Director, I understand your frustration, but I hope you'll give us a chance to address this internally. Aaron shook his head. With all due respect, Sergeant, the time for internal investigations is over. If your department was capable of handling this, we wouldn't be here. Barnes sighed, clearly realizing there was no room for negotiation. What do you need from us? For starters, full access to all records related to Officer Hendricks, Aaron said. I want his incident reports, his disciplinary history, and any complaints filed against him. Barnes nodded reluctantly. I'll make it happen. Just as things seemed to be wrapping up, another squad car pulled up, and a man in a crisp white shirt stepped out. He had an air of authority and looked around with a frown. Deputy Director Knight, he said, extending a hand. I'm Captain Reynolds. I oversee this precinct. Aaron shook his hand but didn't soften his stance. Captain, I'm glad you're here. We need to have a serious conversation about the culture in your department. Reynolds nodded, his expression grim. I've been getting complaints about Hendricks for months. I've tried to discipline him, but the union always pushes back. Aaron's eyebrows rose. So you knew he was a problem and still allowed him to interact with the public? Reynolds sighed. It's complicated, but I'm willing to cooperate fully with your investigation. Aaron studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good. Because if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. As the sun began to set, the crowd slowly dispersed, but Aaron remained on site, reviewing evidence and speaking with his team. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready for the challenge. Just as he was preparing to leave, one of his agents approached, his face pale. Sir, we just uncovered something disturbing. Hendricks wasn't acting alone. There's a group of officers who've been working together to target minorities. We have names, but it's bigger than we thought. Aaron's eyes narrowed. How big? The agent hesitated. Big enough that we'll need to involve multiple agencies. This goes all the way to the top. Aaron's stomach sank, but he forced himself to remain calm. Then we take them all down, he said firmly. As he climbed into his SUV, his mind raced. This was no longer about one officer's actions. It was about dismantling an entire system of corruption, and he wouldn't stop until justice was served. Aaron sat in his SUV, staring into the growing darkness. The weight of what his agent had just revealed lingered in his mind like a storm cloud. A systemic issue. A network of officers who shared Hendricks's mindset, abusing their authority to terrorize vulnerable communities. It wasn't just infuriating, it was dangerous. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself, and reached for his phone. A call to the Bureau's director was unavoidable now. He dialed, and after 2 rings, Director Cynthia Monroe answered. Knight, she said, her voice sharp but calm. I heard there was an incident. You all right? I'm fine, Aaron replied. But we've got a much bigger problem on our hands. This isn't just about Officer Hendricks. There's a network within his precinct. Possibly beyond. We need task force-level resources on this. There was a pause on the other end. Aaron could picture Director Monroe rubbing her temples. Are you sure about this? If we go after a precinct, we'd better have rock-solid evidence. I have my team gathering it now, Aaron assured her. By tomorrow, I'll have enough to justify a full-scale operation. Monroe sighed. All right. Keep me updated. And Aaron, be careful. You're walking into a minefield. I always am, he said before hanging up. The next morning, Aaron met with his team at a secure federal office. The room buzzed with tension as they pieced together information collected from the precinct and witness statements. Special Agent Carla Ruiz, one of Aaron's most trusted colleagues, laid a stack of papers on the conference table. We've got a pattern, she said, tapping a highlighted map. The officers involved in this network, at least 7 confirmed so far, have been targeting minority-owned businesses and individuals under the guise of routine stops and inspections. Aaron leaned in, his brow furrowing. What's their endgame? Extortion. Partly, Ruiz replied. But it's more than that. They've also been falsifying charges to boost their arrest records. It looks like they're angling for promotions. Another agent, Marcus Bell, chimed in. We found financial discrepancies too. Some of them are taking kickbacks from local businesses to look the other way. This precinct is a powder keg. Aaron nodded. And Hendricks is just the tip of the iceberg. As the day wore on, Aaron's team dug deeper, uncovering evidence that painted a grim picture. Hendricks wasn't just a rogue officer, he was part of a coordinated effort to exploit the community. Worse, it appeared that some higher-ups were complicit, either through active participation or willful ignorance. By the afternoon, Aaron called for a break. He stepped outside to clear his head, but his phone buzzed before he could take a breath. It was Ruiz. Her voice was urgent. Aaron, you need to see this. Now. He rushed back inside, where Ruiz was pointing at a laptop screen. We pulled security footage from the precinct, she said. Watch this. The video showed Hendricks in a dimly lit parking lot, speaking to two other officers. The audio was grainy, but the conversation was unmistakable. You think the brass will protect us if this gets out? One officer asked nervously. Hendricks scoffed. Of course. As long as we keep making them look good, they'll cover for us. They always do. Aaron clenched his fists. Who's the brass he's talking about? Ruiz clicked through more footage, showing the officers entering the precinct and heading toward a corner office. We think it's Captain Reynolds, she said. He's been suspiciously quiet about this whole thing. Aaron frowned, recalling his conversation with Reynolds the previous night. He claimed he was trying to discipline Hendricks, but couldn't because of the union. Now I'm wondering if that was just a cover story. The following evening, Aaron arranged a meeting with Reynolds at a diner just outside the city. He arrived early, choosing a booth in the back where they wouldn't be overheard. When Reynolds walked in, he looked tense. Night, he said with a forced smile, sliding into the booth. What's this about? Aaron didn't bother with pleasantries. I need the truth, Reynolds. How deep does this go? Reynolds sighed, glancing around nervously. You have to understand, it's not as simple as you think. The system. It's complicated. Spare me the excuses, Aaron interrupted. Are you involved? Reynolds hesitated, his eyes darting to the door. No. But I know who is. The deputy chief has been pressuring us to keep numbers up, arrests, citations, you name it. He doesn't care how we do it, as long as the stats look good. Aaron leaned back, studying Reynolds. Why didn't you say anything? Reynolds looked genuinely pained. Because I'd lose my job. My pension. My family depends on me, Knight. Aaron shook his head. That's not good enough. You had a responsibility to stop this. Reynolds lowered his gaze, defeated. I'll cooperate. Just, don't destroy my career. Aaron's expression softened slightly. If you help us, you might salvage what's left of it. But you need to come clean. Completely. Later that night, as Aaron reviewed the day's findings, his phone rang. It was Marcus. Aaron, we've got a problem, Marcus said, his voice tense. Hendricks is gone. Aaron's heart sank. Gone? What do you mean? He didn't show up for his shift, and his phone's been turned off. It looks like he skipped town. Aaron stood abruptly, already reaching for his keys. Find out where he might be. Friends, family, anything. He knows too much to let him disappear. As he rushed out the door, Aaron felt the weight of the case bearing down on him. The stakes had just been raised, and the clock was ticking. Somewhere out there, Hendricks was running, and he wasn't running alone. The FBI command center buzzed with activity as Aaron strode in, his face a mask of determination. Screens flickered with maps, phone records, and surveillance feeds. Agents worked frantically, piecing together Hendricks's movements before he vanished. Report, Aaron barked as he approached Marcus and Carla, who were huddled over a table covered in files. Marcus straightened. We've tracked Hendricks to a motel on the outskirts of the city, but he's already gone. He paid cash and checked out early this morning. Carla added, we pulled security footage from the motel. He was with someone, a man in plain clothes, wearing a ball cap. We're running facial recognition now. Aaron studied the grainy still image on the screen. The man's face was partially obscured, but something about him felt familiar. Whoever he's with, they're helping him stay ahead of us. Any leads on their vehicle? We've got a partial plate, Carla replied. Running it through DMV records now. Aaron nodded. Good. I want teams at every major exit point, airports, bus stations, train depots. He's not getting out of this city. Meanwhile, at a dimly lit diner on the edge of town, Jake Hendricks sat in a booth, nervously glancing over his shoulder. Across from him was the man in the ball cap, his face shadowed by the brim. They're closing in on you, Hendricks, the man said, his voice low and gravelly. You've got to get out of here. Jake ran a hand through his hair, his leg bouncing under the table. I didn't sign up for this. They weren't supposed to find out. Relax, the man said, pulling out an envelope stuffed with cash. This'll get you to the border. After that, you're on your own. Jake hesitated, his hands shaking as he took the envelope. What about you? Aren't you coming? The man smirked. I've got my own problems to deal with. Just keep your mouth shut about the others, and you'll be fine. Back at the command center, Carla's voice cut through the chaos. We've got a hit on the partial plate. The car was spotted near the diner on Route 7. Aaron grabbed his jacket. Marcus, you're with me. Carla, alert local units but tell them to hang back. We don't want to spook him. The SUV sped through the city streets, lights flashing but sirens off. Aaron's mind raced as they closed in on the diner. If Hendricks slipped through their fingers, the entire operation could be jeopardized. As they pulled into the parking lot, Aaron spotted the suspect's car parked near the back. There it is, he said, pointing. Stay sharp. He and Marcus entered the diner cautiously, their eyes scanning the room. It didn't take long to spot Hendricks, his pale face betraying his fear. The man in the ball cap was gone. Hendricks, Aaron called out, his voice steady but commanding. Jake froze, his eyes wide. For a moment, it looked like he might bolt, but Aaron and Marcus were already closing in. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Marcus warned, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. Jake's shoulders slumped, and he raised his hands. All right, he muttered. I'll come quietly. But as Aaron approached, a loud crash came from the kitchen. The sound of shattering glass and hurried footsteps. Someone's running. Marcus shouted, drawing his weapon. Aaron didn't hesitate. Go after them, he ordered, keeping his focus on Hendricks. Marcus took off, weaving through the narrow hallway and out the back door. The suspect was fast, but Marcus was faster. He tackled the man to the ground just as he reached the edge of the woods behind the diner. Got him. Marcus called into his radio. Back inside, Aaron secured Hendricks with cuffs and guided him toward the door. You've got a lot to answer for, he said coldly. Jake scoffed, his fear momentarily replaced by defiance. You think this ends with me? You don't know what you're up against. Aaron stopped, his grip tightening on Jake's arm. Enlighten me. Jake smirked, his eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and arrogance. Even if you take me down, there are plenty more like me. You'll never clean house completely. Aaron didn't respond, but his jaw clenched. He knew Hendricks wasn't lying. By the time they returned to the command center, the man in the ball cap had been identified. His name was Brian Cutter, a former officer who had been dismissed from the force years ago for misconduct. He's been off the grid for a while, Carla explained. But it looks like he's been pulling strings behind the scenes. Aaron stared at the screen, his mind working overtime. If Cutter's involved, this network is even bigger than we thought. Start digging into his connections. I want to know who he's working with and what their endgame is. As the team worked late into the night, Aaron sat alone in his office, reviewing the evidence. Hendricks's words echoed in his mind. You'll never clean house completely. He knew the fight was far from over. But as long as he had breath in his lungs, he wouldn't stop. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Carla, holding a file. You're going to want to see this, she said, her tone grim. Aaron opened the file, his eyes scanning the pages. His stomach turned as he realized the scope of what they were dealing with. This isn't just a precinct problem, Carla said quietly. It's statewide. Maybe even national. Aaron closed the file, his resolve hardening. Then we take it apart. Piece by piece. But just as he was preparing to brief his team, an urgent alert came through. One of their undercover agents embedded in another precinct had gone dark. Aaron's heart sank. Get me everything we have on that precinct. If they've been compromised, we need to move now. The command center was eerily quiet as Aaron read the alert on the screen. One of their undercover agents, Lisa Carr, had stopped reporting in from a precinct known for its high number of misconduct allegations. It was a critical blow. The investigation couldn't afford to lose her, especially not now. Carla rushed over, her face tight with concern. Lisa's last known location was the precinct itself, she said. She was supposed to attend a meeting with Herd's supervisor, but she never checked in afterward. Aaron nodded, keeping his voice calm to steady the team. Pull up her GPS data. I want her movements from the last 24 hours. And get a team ready to mobilize. If she's in trouble, we need to move fast. Marcus joined them, holding a printed report. This might be related. We just intercepted a call between Brian Cutter and one of the officers at that precinct. They were talking about cleaning up loose ends. Cutter said, If she knows too much, you know what to do. Aaron's jaw tightened. We're out of time. Let's go. The convoy of black SUVs rolled through the city streets, their tinted windows concealing the highly trained agents inside. Aaron sat in the lead vehicle, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Lisa's a pro, Carla said from the seat next to him. She wouldn't break cover unless it was life or death. Aaron nodded. Exactly. Which means they must have figured out who she is. The tension in the vehicle was palpable as they approached the precinct. Aaron's phone buzzed with a message. Lisa's GPS tracker had pinged from a nearby warehouse, not the precinct. They moved her, Marcus said grimly. Probably to avoid suspicion. Aaron relayed the new coordinates to the team. We're not waiting for confirmation. If she's there, we go in hot. The warehouse loomed in the darkness, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. Aaron signaled for his team to move into position, their movements swift and silent. He spoke into his radio. Remember, our priority is getting Lisa out alive. Watch for traps. They'll know we're coming. The team breached the warehouse, their weapons drawn. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. A muffled cry echoed from somewhere deeper inside. Aaron's heart pounded as he followed the sound, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. They found her in a small windowless room, tied to a chair with duct tape across her mouth. Her face was bruised, but her eyes widened with relief when she saw them. Lisa! Aaron called, rushing to her side. He ripped off the tape and began cutting the ropes binding her wrists. They know, she gasped, her voice hoarse. They know about the investigation. Cutter tipped them off. Before Aaron could respond, a burst of gunfire erupted from the main floor of the warehouse. His radio crackled with Marcus's voice. We're taking fire. Multiple hostiles. Looks like they were expecting us. Aaron turned to the agents with him. Get her out of here now. I'll cover you. Lisa grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You can't let Cutter get away, she said. He's the key to everything. Aaron nodded. We'll handle it. Now go. The gunfight on the main floor was chaotic, the air filled with the deafening crack of gunfire and the shouts of agents and suspects. Aaron joined Marcus behind a stack of crates, returning fire as Cutter's men tried to hold their position. We've got them pinned, Marcus said, reloading his weapon. But Cutter's not here. He must have slipped out during the chaos. Aaron scanned the room, his sharp eyes catching movement near a side door. A figure in a ball cap slipped through the shadows. I see him, Aaron said, motioning for Marcus to cover him. He pursued Cutter through the side door, into a narrow alley behind the warehouse. Cutter was fast, but Aaron was relentless, closing the distance with every stride. Stop! Aaron shouted, his weapon trained on the fleeing man. Cutter turned, his face twisted with fury, and fired a shot. Aaron ducked behind a dumpster, the bullet ricocheting off the metal. You think you can stop this? Cutter yelled, his voice echoing in the alley. We're everywhere. Aaron didn't respond. He moved with precision, flanking Cutter and cutting off his escape route. Cutter's confidence faltered as he realized he was trapped. He dropped his weapon, raising his hands in surrender. All right, he said, his voice trembling. You've got me. But it won't change anything. Aaron stepped forward, his weapon still trained on Cutter. We'll see about that. Back at the command center, Cutter sat in an interrogation room, his face pale and sweaty under the harsh fluorescent lights. Aaron stood on the other side of the glass, watching as Marcus and Carla prepared to question him. He knows more than he's letting on, Carla said. But breaking him won't be easy. Aaron nodded. He's scared, and scared people make mistakes. We'll use that. The door to the interrogation room opened, and Marcus stepped inside, his expression unreadable. All right, Cutter, Marcus said, sitting across from him. Let's start with the basics. Who else is involved? Cutter scoffed. You think I'm just going to hand over names? You don't scare me. Marcus leaned forward, his tone icy. You should be scared. We've got enough to put you away for life. But if you cooperate, we might be able to cut you a deal. Cutter hesitated, his bravado cracking just slightly. You can't take us all down, he muttered. Aaron watched from behind the glass, his jaw tightening. Cutter's words confirmed what he'd suspected all along. This was bigger than one precinct, one city. This was a network with deep roots, and they were only beginning to uncover it. As the interrogation continued, Aaron's phone buzzed with a message. Carla glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. "We've got a hit," she said. "One of Cutter's associates just made a move. They're meeting at a safe house on the other side of town." Aaron didn't hesitate. "Let's go." The team mobilized once again, their determination renewed. The fight wasn't over, and Aaron knew it wouldn't be easy. But as long as people like Cutter thought they could operate with impunity, he would keep pushing. The safe house was their next target, and Aaron was ready to bring it all crashing down. The convoy of black SUVs moved swiftly through the darkened streets, their engines a low hum against the quiet night. Aaron sat in the lead vehicle, his focus unshaken despite the magnitude of the mission ahead. The safe house where Cutter's associates were gathering represented a pivotal moment in the case, a chance to unravel the network and expose its deepest layers. Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got confirmation on the location. Surveillance drones picked up movement about 5 minutes ago. Looks like 6 to 8 people inside." Aaron nodded. "Understood. No mistakes. We hit hard fast, and leave no room for error." The SUVs parked a few blocks away, their occupants disembarking silently. Aaron's team moved like shadows, their tactical gear blending into the night. As they closed in on the safe house, Carla whispered into her mic. "Thermal imaging confirms it, 7 bodies inside. 2 near the back entrance, 1 pacing in the living room, and the rest gathered at a table. They're armed." Aaron signaled for the team to split into 2 groups. One would breach the front, while the other secured the rear. Every move was calculated, the tension palpable as they took their positions. With a signal from Aaron, the breaching charges detonated, their concussive blast shattering the silence. Agents stormed through the front door, their weapons drawn, while the rear team swept in simultaneously. "FBI, don't move!" Aaron shouted, his voice commanding as chaos erupted inside. The occupants scrambled, some reaching for weapons, others attempting to flee. Aaron's team was faster. 2 suspects were tackled to the ground near the back door, while another was disarmed in the living room. The remaining suspects froze, their hands raised in surrender. The room fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the click of handcuffs. Aaron's eyes scanned the scene, landing on a laptop still open on the table. Its screen displayed an email chain, and Aaron quickly recognized some of the names. "Secure the devices," he ordered. "I want everything on this network." Carla moved to the laptop, inserting a data extraction device. "This could be the break we've been waiting for," she murmured. As the suspects were escorted out, Aaron approached one of them, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek. His defiant smirk didn't waver, even as he was cuffed. "You think this changes anything?" the man sneered. "You're just scratching the surface." Aaron stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. "We'll see how confident you are when the indictments start rolling in." The man laughed bitterly. "You can take us down, but there's always more. You can't stop a system that protects itself." Aaron didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Carla. "Get him to the command center. I want him questioned tonight." Back at headquarters, the tension in the air was electric as the team began sifting through the data recovered from the safe house. Carla and a tech specialist worked side by side, decrypting files and analyzing email chains. "This is big," Carla said, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. "They've got contacts in multiple cities, officers, precinct heads, even politicians. This isn't just a network. It's an empire." Aaron leaned over her shoulder, scanning the screen. The names and connections were staggering, but one name stood out. "Deputy Chief Gerald Mathis," Aaron said, his voice low. "He's been a rising star in law enforcement for years. If he's involved, this goes higher than we thought." Carla nodded grimly. "It looks like he's been coordinating with Cutter and others, using his position to shield them. He's untouchable, at least, he thinks he is." Aaron straightened, his resolve hardening. Not for long. The interrogation room was silent as Aaron faced the scarred man from the safe house. The suspect leaned back in his chair, his smirk still intact. "You've got nothing on me," the man said casually. "This is just another fishing expedition." Aaron didn't take the bait. He slid a photo across the table, a picture of the man standing with Cutter and Mathis at a private event. The suspect's smirk faltered for the first time. "Looks like you're more than just a foot soldier," Aaron said. "And if you don't start talking, you'll be the one taking the fall for all of this." The man hesitated, his bravado cracking. "You don't get it," he said finally. Even if I talk, they'll come for me. They don't leave loose ends. Aaron leaned forward, his voice cold. And if you don't talk, you'll go down as the face of this entire operation. Your choice. The man stared at the photo, his jaw tightening. Finally, he spoke. All right. I'll tell you what I know. But you'd better protect me. The information spilled from the suspect like water from a broken dam. He named officers, precincts, and even corporate donors who had been funding the network. It was more extensive than Aaron had imagined, but it was actionable. As the suspect finished, Aaron stood, his expression unreadable. You've made the right choice. But if you're lying, we'll find out. He left the room, heading straight for Carla and Marcus. We've got enough to go after Mathis, he said. Prepare the warrants. We're not waiting. By morning, the operation was in full swing. Teams moved simultaneously across the city, arresting key players and seizing evidence. Aaron led the charge to Mathis's office, his team breaching the doors with precision. Mathis stood behind his desk, his face calm but his eyes betraying his fear. Deputy Director Knight, he said smoothly. What a surprise. Save it, Aaron said, stepping forward. Gerald Mathis, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. Mathis's calm demeanor shattered as agents cuffed him. You have no idea what you're doing, he shouted. You're tearing apart a system that keeps order. Aaron didn't flinch. No, I'm tearing apart a system that abuses its power. And I'm just getting started. As Mathis was escorted out, Aaron stood in the center of the room, his heart pounding. The fight wasn't over, but this was a victory. And he would see it through to the end. The city was waking up to breaking news that rippled through every television screen and radio broadcast. Gerald Mathis, the esteemed deputy chief of police, had been arrested on charges of conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. The footage of him being escorted in cuffs from his office had gone viral within hours, drawing both shock and applause from the public. Aaron sat at his desk, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. His phone buzzed non-stop with calls and messages, but he ignored them for now, his focus on the pile of files spread across his desk. Each one represented a piece of the network they'd just begun to dismantle. Carla entered the room, holding a tablet. You're going to want to see this, she said, setting it in front of him. On the screen was a live feed of a press conference outside the city courthouse. A line of officers and officials, clearly rattled by Mathis's arrest, stood behind a spokesperson who addressed the growing crowd. We are deeply disturbed by the allegations against Deputy Chief Mathis, the spokesperson said. We will cooperate fully with federal investigators and take every necessary step to restore trust in this department. Aaron smirked. They're scrambling. Good. Let them feel the pressure. Carla nodded. But we've got a problem. Several of Mathis's closest associates have gone dark. We've lost track of them since the operation last night. Aaron leaned back, rubbing his temples. It was only a matter of time before they started running. Who are we looking at? Carla swiped through her tablet, pulling up profiles. 3 officers from Mathis's inner circle. Each of them had access to sensitive information. If they've gone rogue, they could be trying to destroy evidence or rally what's left of their network. Aaron stood, grabbing his jacket. Then we find them before they do more damage. Let's start with their last known locations. The search began with Officer Darren Klein, a logistics coordinator who had been responsible for moving assets and laundering money for the network. His home was empty when agents arrived, but a quick search of his computer revealed an email sent just hours before his disappearance. It's addressed to someone named JR, Carla explained, scrolling through the contents. Looks like he's asking for help getting out of the city. Aaron frowned. Who's JR? Still working on that, Carla said. But the email was sent from a public Wi-Fi network near the docks. Could be a lead. Aaron nodded. Get a team down there. I'll meet them in 30 minutes. At the docks, the air was thick with the smell of saltwater and diesel. Aaron's team moved through the labyrinth of shipping containers, scanning for any sign of Klein or his associates. A dock worker approached, his face wary. You folks looking for someone? Aaron showed his badge. FBI. We're tracking a fugitive who was last seen in this area. Have you noticed anything unusual? The man scratched his chin. Saw a guy matching that description get into a van about an hour ago. He was in a hurry. The van headed toward the warehouse district. Aaron's team wasted no time, following the lead to a sprawling industrial area filled with abandoned buildings. The van was parked outside one of the warehouses, its engine still warm. Aaron signaled for his team to move in, their weapons drawn. Inside, the warehouse was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant drip of water from a leaky pipe. The team split into pairs, sweeping the area room by room. Aaron and Carla found Klein in an office on the second floor, hunched over a shredder. Papers littered the floor, and a laptop sat open on the desk. "Klein." Aaron barked. "Step away from the desk. Now." Klein froze, his hands trembling as he slowly raised them. "I didn't have a choice," he stammered. "Mathis told me to keep everything quiet. If I didn't, he'd ruin me." Aaron moved closer, his weapon still trained on Klein. "Your choices don't matter now. You're coming with us." As Carla secured Klein, Aaron glanced at the laptop. It displayed a map of several cities, each one marked with pins. "What is this?" he asked. Klein hesitated, sweat dripping down his face. It's the network. Mathis's contacts. The ones who haven't been exposed yet." Aaron's pulse quickened. Carla grabbed the laptop. This could be the key to taking down the rest of them. Back at the command center, the team worked tirelessly to analyze the data from Klein's laptop. The map revealed a sprawling web of corruption that stretched far beyond their city. Marcus entered the room, holding a printed report. "We've identified some of the pins on the map. They're connected to precincts in 3 neighboring states. This isn't just a local problem, it's regional." Aaron nodded grimly. "Then we expand the operation. Notify the field offices in those states. We're going to need their help." Carla frowned. "That's not all. There's one pin that doesn't match the pattern. It's in DC, looks like it's linked to a lobbying group with ties to law enforcement unions." Aaron's eyes narrowed. "Of course it is. If this network has political backing, that's how they've managed to operate for so long." He leaned over the map, his jaw tightening. "We're not just dealing with bad cops. We're dealing with an entire infrastructure designed to protect them. And if that infrastructure reaches Washington, this fight just got a lot bigger." As the team prepared for the next phase of the operation, Aaron received a call from Director Monroe. "You're making waves, Knight," she said. "Big ones. I'm getting calls from lawmakers, law enforcement leaders, even the Attorney General. They're nervous." "Good," Aaron replied. "They should be. This is bigger than any of us thought, and we're just getting started." Monroe's tone softened. "Be careful. When you go after powerful people, they fight back. Stay sharp." "I will," Aaron said. "But we can't stop now." Hanging up, he turned back to his team. The road ahead was daunting, but Aaron knew they were on the brink of something monumental. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But every step brought them closer to dismantling the system that had allowed corruption to thrive. The command center hummed with tension as Aaron and his team strategized their next steps. The map from Darren Klein's laptop had exposed the vastness of the network, and now the focus shifted to the DC Connection, a lobbying group called Liberty Shield, known for its outsized influence on law enforcement policy. Carla entered the room, holding a folder thick with documents. "Liberty Shield isn't just a lobbying group," she said, placing the file on the table. "They're a front. Their funding comes from shell companies tied to the same precincts we've been investigating." Marcus leaned forward, flipping through the file. "This is how they've been shielding officers like Mathis and Hendricks. Their buying policy and public opinion at the national level." Aaron's face was grim. "If Liberty Shield is their cover, then dismantling it is our next priority. What do we know about their leadership?" Carla pulled up a profile on the screen. "Meet Richard Talbot. He's the CEO of Liberty Shield and a former police chief. He's been in DC for a decade, building his reputation as a reformer." Marcus snorted. "Reformer, my ass. He's the mastermind behind this whole mess." Aaron nodded. "We'll need to tread carefully. Someone with Talbot's connections won't go down without a fight. Let's dig deeper. Financials, communications, anything we can use to build our case." The next few days were a blur of activity. The team uncovered a series of encrypted emails linking Talbot to key figures in the network. Each message hinted at collusion, but nothing concrete enough to bring him down. Aaron tapped his pen against the desk, his frustration mounting. "We need a direct link. Something that ties him to the operations on the ground." Carla looked up from her laptop, her face lighting up. We might have it. One of the emails references a meeting, scheduled for tomorrow night at a private estate just outside D.C. Talbot and several of his associates will be there. Aaron's eyes narrowed. If we can get inside that meeting, we'll have the evidence we need. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're talking about infiltration. That's risky, especially if they're already on high alert. Aaron nodded. It is. But it's our best shot. We'll go in undercover, collect what we need, and get out before they realize what's happening. The estate was a sprawling mansion surrounded by high walls and tight security. Aaron, Carla, and Marcus arrived dressed to blend in, suits and cocktail dresses that allowed them to move seamlessly among the guests. The party was in full swing, a mix of law enforcement officials, politicians, and wealthy donors sipping champagne under glittering chandeliers. Aaron scanned the room, his earpiece crackling softly as Carla spoke. Talbot's in the study, she said. Second floor, northwest corner. He's meeting with a small group right now. Aaron nodded subtly, making his way toward the staircase. Marcus followed at a distance, keeping an eye on the guard stationed near the entrance to the study. Reaching the door, Aaron pressed a small device against the lock. The digital override hummed softly, and the lock clicked open. He slipped inside, finding a dark corner to hide as Talbot and his associate spoke. You've all seen the news, Talbot said, his tone cold. Mathis was sloppy, and now the Bureau is breathing down our necks. We need to shift operations before they get too close. One of the men nodded. What about the precincts in the Midwest? They're the most vulnerable right now. Talbot waved dismissively. We'll cut them loose if we have to. The priority is keeping the East Coast operations intact. We can't afford to lose D.C. Aaron's pulse quickened as he recorded the conversation. This was the smoking gun they needed, proof that Talbot was orchestrating the network's operations. Suddenly, a guard entered the room, his eyes scanning suspiciously. Aaron froze, holding his breath as the guard's gaze swept over his hiding spot. The guard's radio crackled. Check in. Everything secure on the second floor. The guard pressed his radio. All clear. He lingered for another moment before leaving, and Aaron let out a silent sigh of relief. Carla's voice came through his earpiece. You need to move. Security's getting restless. Aaron slipped out of the study, rejoining Marcus near the staircase. We've got what we need, he said quietly. Let's get out of here. As they moved toward the exit, Talbot's voice echoed behind them. Wait. You. Aaron turned, his heart racing as Talbot pointed at him. Do I know you? Talbot asked, narrowing his eyes. Aaron forced a smile, his mind racing for an explanation. I'm with one of your donors, Mr. Callahan. He wanted me to attend on his behalf. Talbot's suspicion lingered for a moment before he nodded. Enjoy the evening, he said curtly. Aaron and Marcus exited the mansion, their pace steady but measured. Once they reached the car, Aaron let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Close call, Marcus said, starting the engine. But worth it, Aaron replied, holding up the recording device. This is the beginning of the end for Talbot. Back at the command center, the team listened to the recording, their expressions a mix of triumph and anger. This is it, Carla said. This ties Talbot directly to the network. We can take this to the DOJ and get an indictment. Aaron nodded. And once we have him, the entire house of cards will collapse. As they prepared their next moves, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that Talbot wouldn't go down easily. The man had built an empire on corruption, and he would fight tooth and nail to protect it. But Aaron was ready. The fight was nearing its climax, and he wouldn't stop until justice was served. Aaron stared at the digital clock on his desk, its quiet ticking amplified by the weight of what lay ahead. The evidence against Richard Talbot was damning, but bringing someone like him to justice required precision. The next steps would be the most dangerous yet. Carla entered the room, her expression both determined and wary. The DOJ signed off on the indictment. We have a warrant for Talbot's arrest, as well as orders to seize all assets linked to Liberty Shield. Aaron nodded. Good. But we can't afford to underestimate him. A man with Talbot's resources won't go down without a fight. Marcus joined them, holding a tablet. Our surveillance team picked up movement at Liberty Shield's headquarters. Looks like they're shredding documents and moving hardware. He knows we're coming. Aaron clenched his jaw. Then we move now. Full deployment. We hit Liberty Shield and Talbot's residence simultaneously. The raid on Liberty Shield's headquarters unfolded like a well-choreographed dance. FBI agents stormed the building, their presence swift and overwhelming. Aaron watched from the command vehicle, monitoring the operation in real time. Inside, Carla led a team through the maze of offices and storage rooms, securing evidence and arresting employees who tried to flee. "We've got hard drives, servers, and a stack of encrypted files," Carla reported through her earpiece. "This is a gold mine." Aaron's attention shifted to the live feed from Talbot's residence. The sprawling estate was crawling with private security, but the FBI's tactical team was making quick work of them. Marcus's voice came over the radio. "We've breached the main house. No sign of Talbot yet." Aaron's stomach tightened. "Check every room, every closet. He's here somewhere." In the basement of the estate, Marcus found a hidden door disguised as part of the wall paneling. Behind it was a dimly lit bunker, filled with monitors displaying live surveillance feeds from various Liberty Shield properties. And there was Talbot, sitting at a desk, his face calm but his eyes betraying a flicker of panic. "It's over, Talbot," Marcus said, leveling his weapon. "Stand up and put your hands where I can see them." Talbot chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You think this is about me? This network runs deeper than you can imagine. Take me down, and 10 more will rise in my place." Marcus didn't flinch. "We'll take down every last one of you if we have to. Now move." Talbot hesitated, then stood, his hands raised. "You're making a mistake," he said as he was cuffed. "You think you've won, but you're only scratching the surface." Back at the command center, Aaron watched as Talbot was escorted into custody. The sight brought a momentary sense of relief, but he knew this was just the beginning of the endgame. Carla entered, holding a freshly printed report. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing it to Aaron. The report detailed Liberty Shield's financial transactions, which revealed a series of payments to high-ranking officials in multiple states. "This is the key to dismantling the entire network," Carla said. "With this, we can expose everyone who's been complicit." Aaron nodded, his mind racing. "Then we take it public. No more shadows. The people deserve to know the truth." The following morning, the FBI held a press conference, with Aaron standing at the podium. Behind him were rows of agents, representing the countless hours of work that had gone into the operation. "Today marks a significant step toward justice," Aaron began, his voice steady. "The arrest of Richard Talbot and the dismantling of Liberty Shield is not just a victory for law enforcement, but for every community that has suffered under a system of corruption. This network was built to protect those who abuse their power, but we are committed to exposing every layer of it." The crowd of reporters erupted with questions, but Aaron stayed focused. "We understand this fight isn't over. There are more individuals, more organizations that must be held accountable. And we will not stop until justice is served." Behind the scenes, the fallout from Talbot's arrest was immediate. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from Liberty Shield, while precincts across the country began internal investigations. But not everyone was pleased with the FBI's actions. Aaron received a barrage of threats, anonymous calls, emails, even letters. One night, as he reviewed case files in his office, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "You think you've won," the voice on the other end said, low and menacing. "But you've made powerful enemies. Watch your back." Aaron hung up, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. He had known from the start that this mission would paint a target on his back. As the team continued their work, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Darren Klein, the logistics coordinator arrested earlier in the case. He offered to testify against Talbot and his associates in exchange for a reduced sentence. "He's spilling everything," Carla said, updating Aaron in the conference room. "Names, dates, locations. He's giving us a roadmap to dismantle the entire network." Aaron leaned back in his chair, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Then we use it. Let's finish what we started." The trial of Richard Talbot began 3 weeks later, drawing national attention. Aaron sat in the courtroom, watching as the once powerful CEO faced a jury of his peers. Klein's testimony was damning, detailing how Liberty Shield had funneled money and influence to protect corrupt officers and silence whistleblowers. The evidence was overwhelming, and by the end of the trial, the verdict was clear: guilty on all counts. As Talbot was led away in handcuffs, Aaron felt a weight lift from his shoulders. That evening, Aaron stood on the balcony of his apartment, gazing at the city lights. The battle against corruption was far from over, but this victory proved that change was possible. His phone buzzed with a text from Carla. "We did it. Drinks on me tomorrow?" Aaron chuckled, typing a quick reply, "You're on." The fight would continue, but for now, there was room for hope. Aaron's victory against Liberty Shield had sent ripples across the nation. Headlines splashed across every major outlet declared the downfall of Richard Talbot and the exposure of a widespread corruption network. The public celebrated, but for Aaron and his team, the fight was far from over. In the weeks following the trial, Liberty Shield's remnants began to resurface like shadows clinging to the edges of society. The arrest of Talbot had created a power vacuum, and factions within the network were scrambling to fill the void. Carla entered Aaron's office, her face lined with concern. "We've been monitoring chatter," she said, placing a tablet on his desk. "There's a group trying to reorganize. They're calling themselves the Shield Remnant." Aaron frowned, scanning the intercepted messages. The group's communications were coded but revealed enough to indicate their intent to rebuild the corrupt infrastructure Liberty Shield had maintained. "Do we know who's behind it?" Aaron asked. Carla shook her head. "Not yet. But they're already targeting precincts that were part of the original network. They're trying to pick up where Talbot left off." Aaron leaned back, his jaw tightening. "We can't let them regain a foothold. If they reorganize, everything we've done will be for nothing." That evening, Aaron convened his team for an emergency strategy meeting. The command center was buzzing with urgency as agents reviewed intelligence reports and formulated plans. Marcus pointed to a map displayed on the central screen. "Most of the activity is concentrated in 3 cities, Chicago, Atlanta, and Houston. They're targeting precincts that were already vulnerable to corruption." Carla added, "We've identified a few key players trying to step into Talbot's role. One name keeps coming up, Franklin Moss. Former captain, dismissed for misconduct 5 years ago. He's been laying low since then, but it looks like he's making a move now." Aaron's eyes narrowed. "If Moss is trying to rebuild the network, he's our next target. Let's focus all resources on tracking him down." The hunt for Moss began with a raid on one of his suspected hideouts in Chicago. The operation was swift and precise, but Moss was nowhere to be found. Instead, agents discovered a trove of documents and encrypted files that painted a chilling picture of his plans. "He's not just trying to rebuild," Carla said as she reviewed the files. "He's expanding. He's looking to recruit officers from cities that weren't part of the original network." Aaron's frustration grew. If Moss is recruiting, that means he's got resources. "Someone's funding this." Marcus nodded. "We're working on tracing the money. Whoever's backing him is just as dangerous." The breakthrough came when one of Moss's associates, a mid-level recruiter, was apprehended during a sting operation in Houston. Under pressure, the man revealed Moss's location, a remote compound in rural Georgia. Aaron wasted no time. "Mobilize a team. This ends now." The compound was heavily fortified, surrounded by tall fences and patrolled by armed guards. Aaron's team moved under the cover of darkness, their approach silent and methodical. Inside, Moss was in a meeting with several men, discussing plans to establish control over precincts in multiple states. "We've got the resources," Moss was saying, his voice confident. "All we need now is time. The FBI may have taken Talbot, but they can't stop us all." Outside, Aaron gave the signal, and the team moved in. The first breach took out the guards at the main gate, while another team disabled the security cameras. As the agents stormed the main building, Moss's men scrambled to respond, but they were no match for the tactical precision of Aaron's team. Aaron found Moss in the meeting room, his face pale with shock as agents burst through the door. "Moss," Aaron said coldly, his weapon trained on the man. "It's over." Moss raised his hand slowly, his bravado gone. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered. "There are more of us. Always more." Aaron stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. "Maybe. But we'll take down every last one of you if we have to." Back at the command center, Moss's arrest was met with a mix of relief and determination. Carla reviewed the files recovered from the compound, finding evidence that tied Moss to several high-profile donors and officials. "This goes higher than we thought," she said. "These people have been funding corruption for years, and they're not going to stop." Aaron nodded. "Then we don't stop either. We take this fight to the top." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of operations, arrests, and revelations. Aaron's team dismantled what remained of the network, exposing its supporters and collaborators. Each victory brought them closer to restoring integrity to law enforcement, but the work was grueling. One night, as Aaron sat alone in his office, Carla knocked on the door. "You should get some rest," she said. Aaron shook his head. "Not yet. There's still so much to do." Carla smiled. "There always will be. But for now, take a moment to appreciate what we've accomplished. Because of you, a lot of people are sleeping safer tonight." Aaron sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's not just me. It's all of us. And we're not done yet." As Carla left, Aaron looked out the window at the city lights. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the FBI command center as Aaron and his team gathered for what would be one of their final debriefings in the case. The fall of Liberty Shield and the arrest of Richard Talbot had sent shockwaves across the nation. But with Franklin Moss now in custody and his plans for rebuilding the network thwarted, the tide had definitively turned. Carla entered the room carrying a folder. Her face was tired, but there was a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. "We've just finished combing through the files recovered from Moss's compound," she began, setting the folder on the table. "This is it. The last piece of the puzzle." Aaron opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. The files detailed financial transactions, correspondence with high-ranking officials, and plans to infiltrate new precincts. At the center of it all was a name they hadn't seen before: Senator Charles Whitmore. "Whitmore," Marcus said, leaning over to look at the file. "He's a major player in the law enforcement lobby. If he's involved, that explains how they managed to operate on such a large scale." Aaron nodded, his jaw tightening. "Whitmore's influence extends to federal policy. If we can prove his involvement, we won't just dismantle the remnants of Liberty Shield, we'll expose the entire infrastructure that enabled it." The team moved quickly, compiling evidence to build a case against Whitmore. It wasn't long before they uncovered a trail of emails, financial transactions, and private meeting records that linked him directly to Talbot and Moss. "We've got enough to bring him in," Carla said. "But someone like Whitmore isn't going to go quietly." Aaron nodded. "Then we make sure there's no way for him to wriggle out of this. Prepare the warrant." The arrest of a sitting senator was a logistical and political nightmare, but Aaron's team was undeterred. Early the next morning, they arrived at Whitmore's sprawling estate with a full tactical team. Whitmore was in his study when the agents entered, his face a mask of controlled anger as Aaron approached. "Senator Charles Whitmore," Aaron said, holding up the warrant. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice." Whitmore stood slowly, his hands raised in mock compliance. "You have no idea what you're doing, Agent Knight," he said coldly. "This isn't just about me. This is about the system you claim to protect. You take me down, and you destabilize everything." Aaron stared at him, unflinching. "The system isn't worth protecting if it's built on corruption. You'll answer for what you've done." As Whitmore was escorted out, reporters swarmed the scene, their cameras capturing every second of the momentous arrest. The trial of Senator Whitmore was a media spectacle, drawing attention from around the globe. The evidence presented by Aaron's team was overwhelming, painting a damning picture of how Liberty Shield had used Whitmore's influence to shield corrupt officers and expand their operations. Aaron sat in the courtroom, watching as witness after witness testified. Carla leaned over and whispered, "We did it. This is the nail in the coffin." Aaron nodded, but his focus remained on Whitmore, whose composure was beginning to crack under the weight of the testimony. When the guilty verdict was finally read, the courtroom erupted in a mix of applause and stunned silence. Whitmore's face was pale, his career and reputation in ruins. Back at the FBI headquarters, the mood was celebratory. Agents who had worked tirelessly on the case gathered in the conference room, raising glasses of sparkling cider in a rare moment of levity. Carla stood, holding her glass high. "To Aaron," she said, "for leading us through this and never giving up, even when it seemed impossible." The room erupted in cheers, and Aaron smiled, a rare moment of pride breaking through his usual stoicism. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "But this wasn't just me. This was all of us. And while today is a victory, we know the fight isn't over. There will always be those who try to abuse their power, and it's our job to hold them accountable. But for now, let's celebrate." Later that night, Aaron stood on the balcony of his apartment, the city lights stretching out before him. His phone buzzed with a message from Carla: "You deserve this victory. See you tomorrow. He smiled, setting the phone down and letting the cool night air wash over him. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, Aaron allowed himself a moment of peace. Justice had been served, and the system was beginning to heal. The months following Senator Whitmore's conviction brought sweeping changes to the law enforcement system. The network of corruption exposed by Liberty Shield had sparked a nationwide reckoning. Precincts across the country underwent audits, officers implicated in wrongdoing faced disciplinary action, and new policies were implemented to ensure greater transparency and accountability. Aaron sat in his office, reviewing the final report from his team. The document outlined the case's outcomes: over 200 arrests, 75 convictions, and the dismantling of Liberty Shield's operations nationwide. It was a staggering achievement, one that had redefined his career, but Aaron knew it wasn't just about him. Carla knocked lightly on the door before stepping in, a small smile on her face. "The director just called," she said. "They're recommending you for a commendation. Looks like you'll have to wear a suit again soon." Aaron chuckled. "I think I've had enough of suits for a lifetime. But it's good to know the Bureau recognizes the team's work." Carla nodded. "You deserve it, Aaron. We all do." This was monumental. Aaron leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "We've made a dent, but there's still so much to do. This kind of work doesn't stop." Carla sat down across from him. "No, it doesn't. But we've shown it's possible to make a difference. That's a win." The following week, Aaron stood on a stage in front of a packed auditorium. The Bureau had organized a formal ceremony to honor his team's work, and as the applause swelled, he stepped forward to address the crowd. "When we began this investigation," Aaron said, his voice steady, "we were up against a system designed to protect itself. A system that told us corruption was too deeply ingrained to be uprooted. But we didn't accept that. We chose to fight for accountability, for integrity, and for the people who've suffered because of these abuses of power." He paused, letting his words settle over the crowd. "This victory isn't just for us," he continued. "It's for every citizen who has been wronged by the system. And it's a reminder that justice is possible when we refuse to back down." The applause was thunderous, but Aaron's gaze found Carla and Marcus in the audience. They nodded, sharing a silent acknowledgement of the work they'd done together. Later that evening, Aaron walked through a park near his apartment, the crisp air refreshing after the long day. A young man approached him hesitantly, his face familiar from the crowd at the ceremony. "Deputy Director Knight?" the man asked. Aaron stopped, offering a warm but curious smile. "That's me." The man extended a hand. "I just wanted to say thank you. My brother was one of the people caught up in this mess, falsely accused, targeted by officers under Liberty Shield. What you did gave him justice. Gave us justice." Aaron shook his hand firmly. "It's people like you and your brother who remind us why this work matters. Thank you for sharing that." The man smiled, his gratitude evident, before walking away. Aaron stood there for a moment, reflecting on the countless lives impacted by the case. Back at his apartment, Aaron poured himself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Drinks tomorrow?" "First round's on me." Aaron replied, "You're on." As he set the phone aside, a rare sense of calm settled over him. The fight against corruption would continue, but for now, he allowed himself to rest. He had fought tirelessly for justice, and in doing so, had made the world just a little bit better. In that moment, Aaron Knight knew he'd fulfilled the promise he'd made to himself when he first joined the Bureau, to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. And though the road ahead would bring new challenges, he was ready for whatever came next.